to this computer. So we want to go into the empathy circle component, and we'll be discussing the chapter 9, which is diving deeper, which is on the screen here, as well as anything else that's alive for you. So if you want to pick up on any of the, I'll go into that in a minute. So, so the chapter 9 of the Listening Well book is called Diving Deeper. And the chapter starts off with a quote, which is, "It takes two to speak the truth, one to speak and the other one to hear." And that's by Henry David Thoreau. And the chapter starts off, he starts talking about the nature of a simple reflection and a complex reflection. And, you know, we've been doing empathic listening, and just kind of a basic empathic listening where you reflect back what you hear, you know, more or less word for word. He's calling that a simple reflection. And he's going into diving deeper now into complex reflection, which is adding guesses of feeling and meaning. So that's a lot that's come up. It's like, how do we go deeper in this empathic listening that we're doing? He uses this model, and this was a model he'd shown before, of, you know, the person speaks, the speaker is speaking, or this person has an experience, a feeling, a thought, and they translate that into words, and then the words are conveyed by the listener who hears them, and then those words are translated into meaning and awareness, perhaps the felt experience by the listener. And in the previous model, he'd shown this, that these are points where things can go wrong. So what you're feeling, thinking, translating it into words, you know, there can be a problem there of inaccuracy. Going from with the words, you know, conveying the words, there can be kind of a sort of a block there. And then when you hear the words and translating it into your own understanding, or that there can be a kind of communication or block there to understanding. And that here he's talking about reflection as a way of gaining that that accurate empathy, to make sure that what the person is expressing is what the listener is really capturing, and it's the reflection of what is said. You keep going until you get more and more accurate in terms of your reflection. And he's basing this model on Thomas Gordon's work. So the chapter starts off, it goes on to, has a heading, Accurate Empathy and Reflective Listening. And he says, reflective listening is a practice. And he tries to make the point that empathic understanding or accurate empathy is more of a way of being. So this is the deeper, not just using kind of like a structural process, but there's a deeper meaning, and perhaps a deeper felt sense, and a deeper consciousness and deeper way of being that that we're trying to get into and kind of nurture. And then he goes into, as another heading, fine-tuning, choosing your words. Reflection is always the choice of what you reflect. So you choose, when we reflect, we're sort of selecting what it is that we're reflecting, and that has an influence. And then he had these other headings of understanding and overstating. You know, like you can understand something, you can sort of exaggerate it, or you can make analogies. And I think the music was where you really capture the sort of the tone, the flavor, the essence, the feelings of what the person is saying. And that was it. And then he has a try it, and the try it is to hold it. He basically says, hold an empathy circle. He doesn't use the word empathy circle. And talk about something on a personal topic with someone using empathic listening, mutual empathic listening. So we've already been doing that for quite a while now. So we have a lot of experience in that. And his try it was using, positive storytelling from childhood memories, or people that, it's like describe each of your parents and your relationship with them when you were growing up, explain how you became interested and involved in the work that you are doing now, and talk about a favorite person and who had a particularly important impact on your life, and what was that person like. So he kind of had these as topics, as gateway topics for his exercise. But the topic we want to have, so we're going to have our own topic, which is, so we could maybe do one round of using empathic listening, talking about what struggles or challenges do you have with empathic listening and what would you like to improve? And then we'll just kind of open it up to anything that, and that was our on arrival question. And then we'll open it up to just anything you want to talk about regarding the chapter or anything else. So with that, who would like to start and who would you like to choose? Okay, Stefan.
Okay, so so I'm going to start. And Nancy, I think, is this the first time we've met?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll speak to you, Nancy.
Okay.
The question, as I heard it, was to discuss maybe some challenges with empathy that I'm personally having. Is that correct, Edwin? Okay. So just this past Friday, I was working quite a bit, and I'd been on call on Thursday evening, and around 1 a.m., one of my residents informed me that a patient was being transferred to the inpatient unit, and it was a patient that I had previously seen a couple of days ago and determined that the patient didn't have a psychiatric disorder, but rather had a medical disorder that was causing his mental status to be different from normal. And so I was concerned that this patient was being transferred, and so I blocked the transfer because it was happening at 1 a.m. I felt I didn't want the same mistake to happen again. And the next morning, I heard through the grapevine that the person in charge of clearing that patient and saying that they were ready to be transferred was very angry that I had blocked this transfer to the psychiatric unit.
So it sounds to me like you had a patient that that you had worked with and determined that rather than a psychological issue, the patient had a medical issue, and that when it came to light that the patient was going to be transferred to a psychiatric unit, you were pretty concerned for the patient's well-being based on your experience and understanding of the case. And so you stopped that and then found out the next day that the person who had initiated the transfer was pretty angry with you. So it sounds like you had some concerns about number one, the patient himself or herself, and number two, the relationship that you have with the person who had initiated the transfer and was angry with you.
Yes, precisely. And to try to keep it brief, as it came time for noon, which is when we have our faculty meeting, I had heard that this doctor had met with the chairman of our department, and discussed their, dislike of what I had done, and I went to the meeting and raised this issue, and it went very poorly, to say, just, yes, and it was very highly conflictual. I did not find myself listening to her, nor did I feel listened to, and it ended very negatively. And then after that, I'll stop there.
So it sounds like there was a follow-up to the case, and that the next day you met with the board about the situation, and had an opportunity. It sounds like the board had an opportunity to hear from the other doctor or person who wanted to have this person committed medically, psychologically, and that there was some, and then you got to have your side heard, only you didn't really feel heard. And it sounds like you also at some point ceased to listen very well. And I'm wondering if maybe your emotions were sort of taking over a little bit. You probably felt questioned. Your opinions and your judgment might have been in question, and so you were probably feeling maybe a little frustrated or and concerned about what it looked like for you.
Well, yes, I felt on the defensive. I felt attacked, I thought that I was being attacked, and I felt angry, disappointed, and then leaving that meeting, my phone had died, and I quickly charged my phone, and then I received a text from this doctor from the early morning saying, please do not block my transfers in the future, or something to that extent, something to that effect. I responded at that. Now, this is after the meeting. I was already quite angry. I did step back for a minute and tried to respond with something that I thought was a little more tempered, and said I was doing my job. And she responded, that's a wonderful rationalization, which then led me to retort back, well, I had already experienced one inappropriate judgment call by you, and wanted to, protect the patient. And then she said, do not text me again. And I said, ditto. So it was a very frustrating, difficult day, very highly conflictual, and I recognize that little empathy that I gave very little empathic listening in this engagement at any point, nor did I receive it. And it just made me realize that, when it is even harder to be empathic when you are being, when you are taking something very personally and, feeling vulnerable. But that's probably just the time when when the empathic listening would be best.
So it sounds like you had a firsthand experience with how empathic listening can be very helpful, and how emotions might affect your ability to participate either as a speaker or a listener in an empathic listening situation. So you clearly were coming into this situation with some frustration, some anger, some defensiveness, and already feeling emotionally involved and impacted by what the situation looked like in your mind to you, your perspective of how it reflected on you as a medical professional. And then when you thought about it later, you realized that emotions can really be almost a block to being an effective empathic listener. And so it was kind of a first-hand experience for you, it sounds like.
Yes. And I also add that that just it wasn't only the immediacy of those emotions there, but it was based on a pattern that had already developed. In other words, there was a history here between the two of us that was, once again, rearing its head. So this was a repeated kind of conflictual, situation that we've had many times before.
It sounds like that was kind of frustrating for you as well, just that there's a pattern there with this particular individual, and sort of here you were again in yet another different situation, but dealing with some of the same dynamics that that you felt were not very easy to resolve.
Yes. Thank you. I feel heard.
Oh, can I ask something to Stefan? What was the last word you tell to this lady? I don't know this word. Would you like to repeat it? Is it a bad word? You said something.
Ditto. It means exactly what you just said.
Can you spell it?
ditto.
Oh, really? I didn't know this word. Oh, and this is a formal word or just slang or something?
I don't know.
It's probably more slang. It's probably more slang, but it just means, like you said, just exactly. Right on.
Oh, really? I don't know this word. Okay, thank you. I'm going to look at this in the dictionary.
Well, so I could go next, and let's see. Since Mimi's looking up a word, I'll talk to you, Edwin.
Okay.
I had an interesting experience yesterday. And I guess it'll relate back to the struggles or challenges. But this was one particular little one, and then I'll try and tie it into my larger challenge. But I had an individual come over to my house to ask for some advice on a job that he's in that I used to supervise. So I know the job, I know the previous manager. And I also know from some of the people that have talked to me a little bit about what's going on. But this guy is in the process of telling me about what all was going on. He basically never took a breath. And yeah. So trying to practice reflective listening with someone who doesn't take a breath is really hard. I'll stop there for a minute.
Okay, yeah, so someone came to, just to talk with you about a work-related, topic. And so the dynamics were that they were just talking and talking and talking and not giving any space for you to say anything or even to reflect, not even taking a breath. So it sounds like it was really a little struggle to just listen to this person.
Exactly. It was, that was kind of tough. And so I think, because I'm a little bit of a newbie at all of this, I think my greatest challenges are recognizing and looking for those meaning and feeling statements when a person is sharing something with them. And I think chapter 9 was really helpful to me. It kind of, it helps when things click, because I'm not just repeating back the simple reflection that the author talks about, just repeating back the statements that you've heard, but I'm repeating something back, or I'm trying to reflect more of the deeper stuff. And that for me helps me understand how the conversation can become more intimate, more deeper, more satisfying. So that's one of my biggest challenges, and has been one of my biggest challenges.
Okay, so it's been a challenge to really see how you can make the listening deeper and more meaningful, and the chapter being about that topic, so it really resonated with you, and so it really was like a meaningful chapter, because it's specifically starting to address kind of what you're trying to do with your listening.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, because I've had a couple of conversations with Ingrid about this, and that when you're just reflective listening, it always just felt like there's some disconnect, like it's so clinical. And last week after our empathy circle, I felt like it was clinical to some degree, because we were doing a lot of reflective, and I'm thinking maybe it was more simple reflection, or maybe I just wasn't catching it, at the time. I can look for those things now. But yeah, it just seemed a little bit clinical. And so I'm glad that that we've read that chapter, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it today, and then also connecting what I've read with the practice itself. And so when I was reflecting back to Stephen, I was hoping that I was able to get to some of those feelings, because I could sense there was a lot more there than just, oh, this, you know, this guy was going to go to the wrong place and I was trying to fix it, so anyway, so I'm looking forward to practicing looking for that deeper meaning. But.
Yeah, so like in our previous circle, you felt that we were doing just the empathic listening, but it was sort of clinical and maybe dry and not like very deep. And you're really wanting to have a listening where you go deeper, and it's really connecting to more meaningful, to make it more meaningful and more intimate in terms of the quality of the listening and the dialogue. And that you were also, I was hearing some hope that you were able to do that with Stefan, that, you're hearing that Stefan is really dealing with some real difficult issues, and, maybe wanting to be supportive and really hear the deeper essence instead of just a superficial reflection of clinical, detached sort of reflection of what he was saying.
And I'll just add, and that's right. That's exactly right. So I'll add just one additional thought, and sort of circling back to the guy that I was working with yesterday. And when he did finally stop to take a breath or a sip of coffee, I was hoping he'd drink more actively, but didn't. At least reflect. He did stop and take a breath, and I was able to provide some kind of a reflective statement or something along those lines. I could actually physically see the difference in his face. I could see some relief, and I could also see him kind of looking off to that place where we look on that side of our brain when we're really thinking and we're going a little bit deeper and we're trying to figure something out. So that was validating for me, and that felt kind of good. That I got to, that I knew that it made a little bit of difference. But anyway, thank you. So yeah.
Oh, so what I'm hearing there is that the person finally did kind of stop and then you were able to offer some empathic listening to him, and that you could see that he was actually moved. You could sense that he had a little bit more space, a little bit calmer in him, and you could even see that he was had space and he was starting to think of maybe solutions, or was in a different space where he had some space instead of just spewing all this stuff out at you, and it just seemed like it felt good. You felt good that there was a little bit of a contribution that you were able to do.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. And I'll just say one thing, and as a note of humor, I didn't realize, I had forgot to put my watch back on, and we were in the backyard. I had no clock. I knew it was going long, that he'd been talking for a long time, but when I finally stood up to really signal that this is the end, that I can't give any more time because I have other commitments, which he didn't quite get, and I had to actually, pretty much say, I'm gonna have to go now, but anyway, it was 2.5 hours. I think he talked to that reason for like 2 hours straight.
So you finally had to just bring it to a close, and it was like maybe a bit of humor to it and just amazement. Like, hey, this went 2.5 hours. My goodness. That was like amazing amount of time for him to be speaking. It's like you're ready to pull your hair out with the frustration about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, then I'll speak to Mimi. Yeah, I've got sort of issues myself, about the listening, but I found myself wanting to respond to what I heard Stefan, or build on what Stefan was saying. And the part there is that, it's like doing this empathic listening when the kind of the shit hits the fan is hard. It's like it's a big mess at that point. And so one of the things is how do we create an environment where that doesn't happen, or we have the tools in place well in advance of the metaphor, the shit hitting the fan.
So I just heard a very interesting phrase that I didn't know actually. So I just noted it down. Okay, I can understand that it has to do with a messy situation. So it seems that even though you're concerned about a number of issues, Stefan's narration really touched you, and you would like to come up with the tools we could use when things go really messy, so they can protect us, and we can't feel as upset and sad, or all these feelings that Stefan experienced a few days ago.
Yeah, it's sort of preparing way, beforehand, before that minute, because can we do an empathy circle, kind of implement the awareness of empathy within the work environment, where there's sort of practice and trust building in the process, beforehand, and then when the conflicts are still small, that they can be worked through. Usually it's like, oh, we have to be efficient, we don't have time for that. But, then, things blow up, and in the long term, it just takes even more time if we don't have all those tools in place, beforehand.
So it seems that all these tools that can help us in communicating with each other more peacefully are absolutely essential. And we should, as professionals, find time to build on these skills, so as when a conflict is about to arise, we can just manage the situation, avoid ending up with very negative results.
Yeah, for example, if there'd been sort of a framework of empathy circles, before that moment, then when the moment arrives, you can say, oh, can we use an empathic listening or an empathy circle to resolve this? Would you be willing to, so there's already a trust in the process. So that's just one idea that I was thinking about, for example.
Okay, one of your ideas was that building trust between the colleagues would be helpful, and if people have already practiced be the circles of empathy, they have participated in a project of this kind, then when they find themselves having a serious disagreement, they might decide to practice this circle of empathy, and they would practice, or they might practice empathic listening, and this could be very helpful for them.
Yeah, so that was just something, building on what Stefan said. For me, I think my situation is also more like what Nancy is saying about how to deepen the empathic listening. And it's sort of I can feel my state of mind when I'm listening. And it's like how to create that state of mind where I feel more grounded and kind of more spacious. And I notice if I have anxiety and, concerns, that kind of takes some of my awareness away. So it's like, how can I be more present, as well as the component? I think one component is to be able to identify and name feelings, better. And so that's, when Nancy's speaking, what is the feeling that she's having, the concern or the worry or the anxiety, to be able to name it, or the struggle, just in terms. And so, yeah, and even now as I'm speaking, how can I speak more from my own felt experience? Like, what am I feeling? That's a sort of a struggle to tap into that felt experience.
Mm-hmm. So Nancy's comment about building deep awareness, you think that is very useful. And when a conflict takes place, it's so important for us to stay grounded, to not to feel disturbed by other feelings or thoughts. This can help us manage our feelings better, and especially when we are in a position to name our feelings. And so this deepens empathic listening, and the result can be very positive when we talk from our own experience, and we are deeply present when this conflict takes place. So we can manage our feelings, and we can manage our words.
Yeah.
And we can avoid very bad results.
Yeah, what I'm sort of thinking is from myself is to name any anxiety that I have in myself. Even to, because I've noticed that if I can share a pain and anxiety, it sort of dissipates and it creates more space. So it's like, it's really identifying, what am I concerned about? Where do I have some anxiety, fear, like in the moment? And for me, there's some anxiety about structure. Like I feel like I have to hold things together, and I have fear of letting go of structure. And the structure itself and the fear of letting go of structure, I think inside myself is sort of a block to empathy. Yeah, for me.
Okay, so you feel obliged to follow some structure, even though I don't really understand what kind of structure this is. And you feel that this doesn't really help you be as efficient as you would like to be in practicing empathic listening when there is a need for it, when there is a disagreement, or when there is tension. And you feel that when you, if you are able to name your feelings and to understand what exactly you feel at this particular moment, this gives you extra space, and you can feel that you can breathe better, so you can you can manage the situation more efficiently.
Yeah, it could be that an empathy circle about just sharing what anxieties we're feeling in the moment might be something that deepens the connection. Just sitting with it, for the whole 2 hours, just what anxieties do we sense in our bodies in the moment, and just sharing that. Yeah. Actually, I feel a little tearful just even saying that.
Okay, so you think that if we can practice empathic listening for 2 hours, and in this session we can just identify and share the anxieties we experience throughout the session, this will be very important for us. And I don't know if you mentioned anything else.
A little tearful, just sort of. I just noticed a little softening and a teary sort of, just touching on a little tearfulness, kind of a quality, just even saying that.
Oh, okay. So yeah, even sharing this makes you feel extremely emotional. Just the thought of the idea, just sharing this idea of this kind of empathic circle makes you feel deeply emotional.
Yeah, it's not emotional. I would say tearful was the word. It's not extremely. It's just a little tinge.
Tearful? You mean when we have tears?
Yeah, when you have a tear, there's a sort of a softening, and that if it got really deep would be sort of a tearfulness. But it's just like a little, just feeling a little bit of it. Just saying, yeah.
Okay, so how the word that could describe how you feel is that you feel a little bit of tearfulness just after expressing this idea of yours with us.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
Thank you too. I like to talk to Nancy, and I would say that what Stefan shared a few minutes ago was very strong, and this made me feel that we have to take, sometimes I feel that our circle of empathy is in an incubator. It's very protective, and it's away from the real life situations. And I love this idea so much. And I would love to see how it works in the real life situation. And what Stefan shared before was just a very real life situation. It was very, very true example of what is going on in our lives.
So, yeah, you see as well that there's some, the empathy circle, in this situation, or in a sort of a scholar or clinical situation, is more structure, process oriented, but it doesn't bring in the real life emotions and issues that we deal with every day. And so you appreciated Stefan's example of the situation that he ran into, and how empathic listening could have been beneficial, but was sort of blocked by the emotions. So it's, what is the reality compared to what is the academic setting perhaps, and there you see the difference there, and you would like to experience more of the reality in the empathic listening setting.
Yeah.
I didn't articulate that very well, I don't think.
No, it's perfect. Yes. I also, I'm thinking about how different we are. All of us don't have the same personality traits. Some people are more explosive, some others are more pathetic. So I really understand that when you are in extreme tension, you don't have much chance to think about empathic listening, especially when you feel being attacked, when you feel that people treat you in an unfair way. I mean, you might have the best of intentions and you really want to just try to stay calm, but I don't think that it's really possible unless we have a disagreement with another person who is already aware of what empathic listening is. But how possible is this in our professional world?
So it sounds like you have some concern about translating the practice that you've been doing with the empathy circle in this setting and translating that to the real life setting. And it almost sounds like you might be concerned about, whether or not you would be successful in a situation where there's an actual disagreement, and empathic listening could help resolve that situation.
Right, because it's a different story when I am in the middle of a disagreement and I'm trying to practice empathic listening when two other people have a disagreement but I'm not involved. And how can I handle the situation when I am directly involved into this fight or issue? And this is exactly what we discussed last Monday.
So yeah, so it does sound familiar. I remember talking with you about that last week, and you're concerned that when you are a third party, that how you would use the empathic listening to resolve the disagreement. What I'm not really sure about is if in this setting you're the mediator and you're trying to mediate a disagreement between two other individuals, or if there's three of you involved in the disagreement and how you can help facilitate it.
What I tried to say was that it's a different story when two people, me and another person have a disagreement. So two people have a disagreement, and this is totally different from the situation when two people have a disagreement and I try to be the mediator. So I'm away from their conflict. I'm not emotionally involved in the second case, while in the first I'm one of the protagonists, and I think that it's much more, it's harder than being just a mediator.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so you totally can empathize with Stefan's case, in which he was one of two people in a situation where empathic listening was really blocked by the emotions and some history related to that particular relationship and some of the conflict. And conversely, if you are more of the mediator and you're not emotionally involved with the situation, then it's easier to see and to use the tools such as empathic listening to help the parties describe and resolve their differences.
Okay, right. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
So I could talk to Stefan. I think Ingrid said she didn't want to talk, but if you do, Ingrid, and you feel like you have signal, I'd surely give my space here.
I think it's really interesting listening, being the silent listener. And I've noticed, I'm not going to talk, but I just want to say a couple things because I do think I could lose here. But I don't have the anxiety like when Edwin was talking about anxiety coming in. Sometimes I've noticed with just being the silent listener, not having to listen, that I'm more relaxed here. And anyway, so it's just an interesting point. So that's, I'm just going to sit here and listen. And I tell you, I feel like it's like hearing the stories too. Like when Stefan was talking, it's like my heart was going out to him, but I can't say anything. So I'm going to sign off, or I'm going to stay on, but stop talking.
Yeah. So what I heard you say, Ingrid, is that it's sort of relaxing and much less stressful to be able to just observe what's going on than to actively participate. And I think that I'm hearing that there's pressure when you are the listener to reflect back what you've heard and try to be as accurate as possible. And so when you don't have to do that and you can just, oh, she's gone. Anyway, I think that's what I heard, and yeah. So maybe I'll take that and I'll talk for a second to Stefan. You know, I agree. There is. It does seem like with Ingrid, I agree that it does seem like I do feel a little bit of tension and stress, knowing that I've got to try to hear and then remember and then articulate what's been said. And sometimes that's hard when the story is complicated, or maybe you have cultural differences in language, or verbal or body language. And so I find that kind of stressful on the one point. So I'll stop there for a minute.
Paying attention to all this different sensory data can be overwhelming.
Exactly. It can. And so I think the second thought I wanted to touch on is something that Edwin said that it's one of my major challenges as well. And I think it's something that I wrote down actually, and that is identifying and naming the feelings, and being able to use more creative language for describing the different emotions and feelings, not only maybe mine when I'm speaking, but the listeners the speakers when I'm listening, because there's, those charts that show all the different kinds of emotions that we can have. I don't have one on my wall, so I just have to try and remember all these and think about them. And I think I have a very simple language when it comes to that. You're pissed off or you're happy. There you go. But it's like, all right, I'll stop there for a minute.
So a challenge is looking for perhaps a different word or phrase that captures the emotion accurately, and it's it's something you're struggling with.
It is. And then one other thought I had related to something that Edwin said was that you felt a little bit emotional about the structure and in the feeling part of the empathy. And I was just sensing and wondering about the expectations that you might have of yourself that maybe don't allow you to have the flexibility to relax a little bit with the process and just feel through some of the stuff that's going on. And so I don't know, that may or may not be accurate, but I sensed that you just have very high expectations of yourself in terms of how we do this. And maybe that's a question for Edwin, or maybe it's just I don't know what to do with that. Sorry, I had to say it. I'm your fly in the ointment here.
I wasn't exactly clear if you were referring to my situation or what.
No. It was just a third point that I had to make. So I'm sorry, I was unclear about that. It was just a point. It was something that Edwin had said that I picked up when he was talking to Mimi, and it just triggered a comment. I just felt like I needed to say something about it. So that's what I'm saying. Sorry.
Okay, we wanted to pick up on something that Edwin had said, but I'm afraid I got disconnected from the first piece of the message. Really, I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow it.
Not your fault. How about this? Let me just, if you don't mind, maybe I can just address this part of it to Edwin and then let you off the hook, because I've kind of like messed with the process, I think. But so Edwin, when you were talking about feeling a little emotional about the structure of, the circles, and sometimes becoming very focused on the structure and the process itself, but yet you had a little trigger of emotion. It just made me wonder if you had such expectations of yourself that if you don't maintain this process and keep the process moving forward, that there might be some kind of a failure on your part in terms of accomplishing the higher vision and intent.
Yes, maybe I'll just reflect that. So what I was hearing is that part where I was talking about feeling the structure, letting go of the structure, and some tearfulness, talking about that there might be that might be caused by some expectations of you didn't use this word, but responsibility or something that you're trying to identify what it might be in myself that is causing that, sort of taking on responsibility for the structure and maybe the whole, or even the whole larger kind of empathic vision. I don't know if I was quite getting that, but
yes, that's it.
Okay. Then did you feel heard?
Oh, I feel heard.
Okay, then Stefan.
I'll talk to you, Edwin.
Okay.
So, empathic listening is one of several options available to us when we are communicating. I did a quick call to my boss after this whole episode unraveled, and he suggested just more listening, and not necessarily empathic listening, because he warned that empathic listening tends to work in situations where the interpersonal stance of the person you're engaging with is a trusting one. However, when there's a sense of distrust in the dyad, that empathic statements can create a more problematic communication, because it's this interpersonal distance that that people who have a less trusting interpersonal stance want to maintain, and feel actually threatened and off guard, that you are trying to get inside their mind, by utilizing empathic statements.
Okay, so after this event happened, that your boss suggested just listening. Oh, I guess this first step was that there are multiple ways of addressing a conflict like that, and your boss was suggesting just listening, not necessarily empathic listening, because doing the empathic listening can sort of has problems of its own, in that the person might not be trusting. It doesn't really. The boss is saying that doesn't work in a mistrusting environment. That it's sort of it's causing. There's sort of mistrust, and that the empathic listening is maybe going too deep. They don't want to go that deep. Yeah. And because they want to keep a distance, and the empathic listening is actually causing some kind of closeness, getting into the person's mind, and they just want a real sense of distance to maybe protect themselves. So it may be they would feel too vulnerable or something like that too.
Yes. Yeah. I guess a warning is that, empathic listening is not always the answer. Active, attentive listening, and just curious, open-ended, questions, particularly in situations of high conflict and no sense of trust between the two in the dyad, is often more fruitful in communication, according to what my boss suggested. And I guess another comment is, I was thinking really deeply about we begin these sessions with this call to be present, with this moment of mindfulness, and I was thinking, what is that about exactly? And I was talking to a friend about it, and he said he's very, very well-read and very empathic kind of guy. He says, it's like tuning your instrument or a scale. Before you weigh something, you want to set it to 0. And this intentional aspect of beginning with mindfulness before we engage in empathic listening, he suggests allows us to zero out, or at least be aware of what we are bringing to the listening component. That we may be meaning makers or meaning changers to the communication we are receiving, if we're not careful in having zeroed our own kind of internal space about what is going on here that might influence what I'm hearing.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is that you're just addressing that we do in our own group in terms of that check-in period, and you're seeing that as mindfulness, being so mindful, and the intention of the mindfulness is to get you call it the zeroing out, which is kind of reconnecting with self and sort of getting to this foundational quality. And so you're just sort of making a note of that, maybe implying that that's kind of helpful. there's multiple ways of addressing a conflict, and that seems to be maybe one component, is to have that sense of self-connection. Mindfulness, as you're calling it, is one component.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in retrospect, had I had the presence of mind to, take a moment and take a few deep breaths and try to, be present in the moment, perhaps I could have allowed her to speak more, and then subsequently listen more, and respond in a way that would have brought more engagement to the interaction, instead of the escalating spiraling of distrust and distance.
So you're just going back to the conflict you had with this person, and just sort of imagining that you're seeing that sort of as a growing, escalating conflict that was happening, and you're just imagining if you were able to sort of connect with yourself, tune in, sort of zero yourself out, have that mindfulness, that may have created a space for the to keep the conflict from sort of escalating. So you're sort of it sounds like you would like to have a more productive way of addressing these conflicts, and that you're thinking that this might have helped.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I would say I had a pretty clear perspective on what her emotions were. I knew she was angry, and I understood her. I believed that I understood her kind of perspective. I had interfered with her work, and demonstrated perhaps in some way that I subverted her abilities, questioned her judgment, her abilities, etc. But having identified that cognitively, having identified the emotion in her, I was also bringing to it a lack of ability to regulate my own emotions at the time, and so it was a bad outcome because I wasn't able to manage my own emotional responses, even though I was aware of her perspective and kind of her emotions that were behind, our interaction.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that you actually had a sense of empathy. You were empathizing with her, where she was coming from, sort of understanding. You felt you were understanding where she was coming from, her emotions, but sort of the failure or the block was your own regulation of your own feelings, and that so you're sort of like looking at how you could be able to regulate your own feelings better, and seeing this mindfulness and sort of taking a pause, some self-connection is maybe a step for that.
Well, I guess I'm going to go out on a limb and say, William Miller's other book called Loving Kindness. One way that's translated, in Greek Loving kindness is out of the kind of Eastern language, but in Judeo-Christian kind of perspective, Greek, this would be caritas or charity. If I had been able to be more charitable toward her and toward myself in that moment, perhaps I could have found some way of not spiraling into this, emotional state where, my responses, escalated, the situation.
So you're seeing that perhaps a way to keep this from escalating like it did was to nurture more charity in yourself, charity or generosity for yourself and for the other person. So you're sort of thinking, oh, how do I, maybe that's the way forward, is nurture this. And it sort of addresses it's also the loving kindness that I think, or that Bill Miller's book was talking about. And so kind of a question like how to nurture that, is that a way forward?
Yes.
Or maybe even some regret that you didn't do that, feeling of regret, that you regret that you hadn't done that.
Both, yes. Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of, I guess, in summary, I would say that's one of my major weaknesses, is at times I have difficulty with self-compassion or charity towards myself. My expectations of myself, psychoanalytic language, I have a very punitive degree of, and it also causes me to be very uncharitable and punitive at times to others when it's not warranted.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that perhaps one aspect of this spiral was that that you, for yourself, you feel very self-critical, very demanding, and not charitable to yourself. And because you don't have that for yourself, that maybe that resonates to not having it for others, and just sort of aware of that quality in yourself. And
absolutely. That was real. This is a really good reflective period for me.
mm-hmm. So you're finding this helpful, the reflection of it, to kind of reflect on that in yourself, and it seems like maybe it's contributing to your understanding.
Yeah, I feel a little less tension in my temporomandibular.
So just being able to express this, look at it, the tension in your temporal fibular has gone down. I'm noticing the reduction.
Yeah.
Is there more? Do you feel heard?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll speak to Mimi. And yeah, what comes up? So I know Stefan mentioned that when we do our check-in, doing that sort of mindfulness, I see that as self-empathy, that we're really connecting and empathizing with ourselves, right? It's like creating a sense of awareness of our own felt experience. So that's kind of the term I use, is self-empathy, that we can, just feel and sense, become more attuned to what's going on in our own body, and that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. So what I hear is that after, I mean, Stefan gave you the chance um, to feel and to think about what is the meaning of the first step. The first step we take in every session of ours, and in particular, Stefan talked with a friend of his about when we try to check in at the beginning of the session, and his friend talked about he described it as a process that we try to tune in with ourselves, and you feel the same, but you use a particular word, and that is self-empathy. So at this initial stage of our meetings, we try to empathize with our own selves before we move on to the other steps of our session.
Yeah, and I want to give a real plug to the relational aspect of what we're doing, is that there can be a sense of I have to be able to do it all myself, right? I have to sit there, kind of go into detachment, go into this mindfulness, self-connection, and kind of solve all the problems on my own. And I think, that's doable. We can do that self-empathy, but I'm a real fan of the mutuality of being heard too, the support, that there's others taking that journey into self with us, so that we're not alone. And I think that really adds a lot of support. So I guess I'm kind of like making a plug for not being all individualistic. I have to do it all on my own, but the importance of this sort of mutual empathic listening, that we're just not alone with what's going on inside of us.
Okay, so what I hear is that you feel that through mutuality and through sharing our feelings, it's as if we fight individuality, and we are less self-centered. So in this journey, when we try to learn more about ourselves and understand our feelings, we're not alone. We have the other members of our group, and they embark on this journey with us. Even though we could, up to some point, we could solve most of our problems through self-empathy, it sounds and it feels more important when this is a shared experience.
Yeah, I know when I do the sort of the self-empathy by myself, I can feel kind of lonely. There's sort of there's like a deep pit or pain of going into myself. But if I can share that with someone else or with others, it kind of helps sort of relieve it more. So there's something about the shared empathy that actually supports self-empathy. It's like being heard by someone else actually allows me to empathize even more deeply with myself. It's very supportive for the self-empathy. So, yay! Yay for relational empathy.
So even though you believe that self-empathy is a very important thing for you, it entails a feeling of loneliness, and it makes you experience deep pain. But all this fades away when you can share your feelings with others. And what is more, you can progress more in empathy when you share your situation with others.
Yeah, it's like my mother always used to say, it's an old saying, sorrows shared or sorrows halved, joys shared or joys doubled. So I think, the old wise tales knew it long ago.
Yeah, so this reminds you of what your mother used to say, and she used a saying that and the meaning was that when we share our sorrows, then our sorrows become less, but when we share our cheerfulness, then it doubles. So this is something that you experience every time you have the chance to share your feelings with other people.
Yeah. So I'm grateful for just the sharing that Stefan is doing about his experience. So I feel like I'm growing from it as well, from his sharing.
Mm-hmm. And you deeply appreciate and evaluate Stefan's decision to share his experience with all of us, and it makes you feel that you have it helps you grow in empathy and improve your empathic listening skills.
Yeah, yeah. And I also appreciated Nancy's comment about the structure, kind of the relationship of structure and I don't know what it is. It's like just deep presence too. So there's still sort of an edge for me around that it's like the structure responsibility feels sort of painful. It has a painfulness to it, and it's kind of like moving past that is just feels good and kind of helps sort of melt some of that structure and that pain, around it. And responsibility, there's something,
Mm-hmm. So it seems that Nancy's comment was very meaningful for you because she was in a position to empathize with you and really feel that your need to stick to structure and just to do things the right way according to your own standards make you feel it takes a toll and makes you feel makes you enjoy the procedure of empathic listening less. You don't like that much because you have to stick to the structure, and it seems that Nancy made you feel more relieved, and whenever you find yourself sticking less to the structure, it's better for you.
Yeah, well, I want to give structure its due, too. It's like I don't want to say, no structure. Everything has its due in its place. So I don't want to say, we can't have any structure. It's like, I want to give everything its own voice, and it's there for a reason. It's doing something. It has something, too. So I don't want to dismiss or discount the structure. I do know from myself, I think the structure, one thing is just kind of letting everything go and kind of being with the moment. I have a little concern of being like a deer in the headlights, of freezing, like, I don't know what to do next. And just sitting with that sense of, I don't know what to do next is kind of scary for me. And I kind of fear it's going to be like a deer in the headlights. It's like, it's like, I want something to happen. I want some kind of movement, but it's like, I'm totally frozen. I don't know what to do next. And it's sort of like looking into the pit. There's like this pit of not knowing what to do next. And I'm trying to get better at just naming it. It's like, I feel like there's a pit of not knowing what to do in the moment. So you kind of name, just to be able to keep naming whatever it is that I'm feeling in the moment. And I'm kind of seeing that might be a way through. Like, I feel like a deer in the headlights. I have no clue of what to do right now, or just sort of being able to kind of be present with what is, but keep naming it, because usually when that happens for me, I would kind of pull in and kind of constrict instead of just naming the experience that is happening and sort of developing more trust in the naming of what's happening. So I don't know if all that makes any sense, but it makes sense to me. So.
Okay, I'll try to reflect that. So even though you understand, you realize that your need to follow some structure can affect you negatively. However, you realize the usefulness of this. That is, you don't want to be like a deer in the headlights, I think you said.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't
frozen.
know.
Yeah, they get frozen.
So, okay, instead of feeling like this, which is a scary feeling, you want to know what comes next. So you want to know the steps. And this makes you feel more safe, more secure. So you don't want us to follow no structure and just meet online and just do whatever we want to do. And also you said that it's important for you to keep naming the feelings that you experience. This is something very important for you, even though you express some concerns that that what you share with us right now might not make full sense to us, but it's absolutely important for you, and you can really understand what you're talking about.
I can feel what I'm talking about. Yeah. So yeah.
You can feel what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I feel heard.
Thank you too. So I like to talk to you, Edwin, and I would like to say that what I find in my interactions with people quite often is that they have a difficult, I mean, we discussed today about how things are going on when the serious conflict takes place, but on the other hand, I see that people are allergic to conflicts. So I see that they don't want to solve the disagreements. They just pretend that everything is fine, and they put things under the carpet, or I think is another expression, they ignore the white elephant or something. And this this seriously concerns me.
So you're concerned that instead of people generally, instead of engaging and addressing a conflict, that the conflict is sort of swept under the rug metaphorically, or they just ignore the conflict in the room, which would be metaphorically like the elephant in the room. And you're concerned, there's a sense of concern that instead of sort of being able to connect with the conflict, address it, that it's ignored.
Yeah, I'm really concerned because I see that this will backfire, and this is an unsolved situation, and they're gonna find it in front of them again and again. So I was thinking about how easy would it be for us to come up with a few steps or tools or skills that could help all of us feel less afraid with confrontations and clashes.
So you're seeing that if these things get kind of swept under the rug, they just keep coming up all the time and don't get addressed. So you're looking at what are some processes or tools or ways that we could create some ways of addressing conflict, sort of productively, constructively addressing conflict.
And when I'm thinking about a solution, and when I'm trying to understand why I have a very different view on this, I recall things I've studied while I was studying religion, and in Orthodox Christianity, we try to differentiate who a person is from their actions. So we are not our actions, we are something different than this, which means that a person might have done something bad, somebody is socially considered bad. However, this does not necessarily make a person be a villain. So I think this is a very serious difference, that we shouldn't, after all, take ourselves so seriously. And when somebody disagrees with us, doesn't mean that they dump us. They just they don't recognize any value in who we are. We just have different views, and I think that my studies have helped me a lot to just not feel attacked when people just don't agree with me.
So you're seeing like how to deal with conflict, and one part is just to see conflict as normal, and to sort of differentiate someone when they do something, that there's sort of an action and then there's the person, sort of and so you don't dismiss the person. You may not like the action, but have a separation of that. And that instead of creating a wall between you and the person, you stay present with them and sort of their humanity, but see the action as a separate.
Right.
and not kind of ignore them anymore and just kind of leave. You know, you're not just like totally distancing yourself. You're still seeing them, but just seeing
Yes.
their actions is separate.
Yeah, because I believe that the problem is not when we disagree, the problem is how we disagree. And we can just still be respectful and well-mannered, even though we see things in a radically different way. And I'm very concerned about it when I see people pretending that everything goes well while it doesn't. It affects me negatively.
Mm-hmm. So you're feeling real concern, and there's like a real negative affect on you just to see that people aren't really addressing the conflicts, and so it's just real concern, and you'd like to do something about it. You know, take some kind of positive action to address this.
Mm-hmm. And also, I just want to mention that something that really attracted my interest in the chapter we had to prepare for today was that empathy is a way of being. This is one of the very first things we shared all together, one of the first sessions. So for me, empathy is not just a skill. It's not just kind of like table manners. So I know how to use the fork and the knife. Okay, and after that, I might forget everything, or I might go to a fast food, eat a burger, and just forget all my table manners. Empathy, I deeply believe that is how we are wired. That we express it no matter what, even if the level of empathy fluctuates and it's not the same. Of course, when we are in a very dramatic situation, we might express less, like the incident we discussed today, while when we feel more relaxed, we can express it even more. I'm not saying that this is that we should be like that, but I think that the external conditions we face can affect the level of empathy we show to people around us and even to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there's this basic seeing the humanity of others and having that sense of connection, and that that's what that empathic way of being is about. It's not about just how you use a knife and fork and how you do empathic listening, the structure of it. There's a deeper awareness of sort of the humanity. You didn't use that word, but it sounds like the humanity of everyone, and seeing that, and that's sort of the deeper, and that's maybe part of the deeper empathic way of being.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Okay, great. And well, that's we have about 11 minutes, so maybe kind of moving towards closing. We could just go around if everyone just kind of shares how was the call today, just any kind of closing, as well as maybe even a shared motion of how everyone's doing. So maybe I'll start. I felt it kind of grateful for Stefan for sharing this conflict, because it seemed like it really helped kind of deepen the conversation. So it feels like in a very richer, deeper sort of quality to the conversation for me. And for me, it's always sort of like this. It's a lot of, I don't know, it's just a feeling, sort of this kind of emotion. I don't know if Stefan, if you're willing to get that mirrored. Okay, yeah, so thank you. That's me. Nancy, do you want to go?
Yeah, I like you. I appreciate the conversation that you and Stefan had. I think that was a really great example of getting deeper and deeper, and kind of what is it Miller was talking about in chapter 9, and kind of making it more of a conversation rather than a I say this, you say that type of thing. So I think that was a really good example, and I appreciated that. So yeah, I think every week is going to be a little bit easier in terms of understanding some of the skills and knowing each of you a little bit better and how to participate effectively.
Okay, Stefan, do you want to go? Oh, what's your motion before? How do you feel in the moment? What does it kind of look like?
Oh, probably calm. We get to calm.
Okay, Stefan.
Well, you know, I've been spending a great deal of time scouring the literature in order to put together this proposal for this talk. And as I've already said previously, I found Miller's book quite wanting in a number of ways. I felt that it really just scrapes the surface and could leave a lot of people with a very naive confidence that they understand empathic listening when it's simply, utilizing, what is in that book just wouldn't get you very far at all. Over the weekend, I was trying to figure out what was the best intentional thing that I could have done in that moment when I was in that faculty meeting, other than just simply listening. What I concluded with is something called a diffusing statement. Essentially how this would work would be, she would make some comment about, I would prefer that you, not interfere with my transfers. And if I had said something like, interfering with transfers, that must have really, I can imagine you were quite pissed off when I interfered with your transfer. That statement, I think, could have brought us somewhere. And it was in that moment that I have to admit I really didn't give a damn about her perspective, and I wasn't demonstrating a empathic way of being. My understanding of empathic way of being is that you are genuinely interested in the other person's point of view, and you believe that something that you can learn something from that point of view, which is different from just the technical aspects of reflecting a statement or paraphrasing. It's this deep and genuine interest, which I had zero in the moment with her, and I'm still working on this, but I've seen it be a miracle in so many situations. So, like, say I'm running late to see a patient, and I walk in the room, and the guy's like, "God damn it! I've been waiting here for an hour for you." Yeah, if I was waiting here for an hour, Mr. Benson, I'd be pissed off too. So you know, those diffusing statements used in those you know, contexts where you know, it's clear that, you know, you've identified someone who's angry, I think is very effective. But I have yet to find the presence of moment to consistently utilize this approach.
Okay, and the motion that kind of expresses your feeling in the moment? Okay. Then Mimi, go on.
I would like to mention two things. I have decided to say that before listening to Stefan's last comment, that I would like to see us talking about important social issues, and I would really love to see how empathic listening works when in our group. So far it seems that we can communicate quite peacefully, but I want to see how this might affect the way we communicate when we find ourselves in the middle of a serious conflict. So that was the one thing. And the second was, I felt that Stefan is really concerned about the situation, and I just tried to think how would I have responded if I was late for a class. And I think that people don't really apologize honestly. I mean that this is just a general comment I have seen in my life, that they feel that it's humiliating, you know, if I say I'm truly sorry, I really feel very bad. I mean, let me see what can I do for you right now. But very honestly, I express my sadness that, oh my God, I did something that was not good. So I think that in the first place, when we let somebody down for any reason, we should express our honest pain that was not what we really wanted to do, and we are ready to make up for this. And I mean, I would love to see people be less afraid of the "I'm so sorry about that" thing, and to really mean it. So I would say that I'm quite happy as usual, and quite positive. So, and calm. So I would go for this straight line that implies serenity and peacefulness. Thank you.
Well, I want to respond to that with a little bit of conflict.
Sure.
You know, what I heard you saying, Lisa, is that, you know, we're often want to apologize in situations, and that apology, you know, could make things better. An apology indicates that you have identified with the other person's perspective and you agree with it, and that you, for example, did something wrong. You see, in this situation, I had no intention, nor would I ever apologize for what I had done. It wasn't warranted in my estimation, and in fact, it would be inauthentic and disingenuous and distancing the communication, and it would be a lie, because I wasn't sorry, but being empathic and making a diffusing statement about you know, noticing her perspective, that yeah, I see why you're pissed off that you know, I did this. With her perspective and her line of communication is something that she can, take in. But you have to be careful with an apology. It has to be in my estimation, has to be something that's really intended, because you don't want to give an apology when it clearly is not what you really mean.
So I think we have a little bit of a conflict here, which is great. So maybe next week we can do some role play with apology and not apology, and they can have an empathic dialogue with each other. So I would suggest we do a little few rounds around that. And I do want to be sure to, in closing, to hear Ingrid. Do you want to check in before we close? I want to keep us on track too.
Sure. I never knew that the silent listener experience could be so rich. And I think part of that is because of Stefan being vulnerable to share the experience that he had, and also to hear the the empathic listening in process. So I can't visually show you something, and I'm not very good with sound effects. But I'm thinking of the purring of a cat. That's what I feel like right now. But I don't know how to make that sound.
Come on, let's get it. Let's hear it. Oh, that's a delight.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I was able to participate. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad you could participate as well. So I'm serious about the role play, because I've done empathic dialogue between concepts before. You do a role play of a concept, and it's really rich. So I would like to have that as part of the exercise next week. So next week is chapter 10, and we will.
Oh, before we close, can I just add something?